Hi, everyone. How's everybody doing today? My name is Nicole. I don't know if I can see you guys. Wondering if you want to type into the chat your name and your title and where you're from. Yeah, we can get this exciting adventure started. So my name is Nicole. I'm the manager from the Center for the Changemaking and Social Innovation, and welcome today to Changemaking versus digital transformation. So if you feel like you're in the wrong session, this is the session we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Would love any feedback in the comments right now. Make sure everything's working okay. So just type your name, your position, the school you're from in the chat. That would be fantastic. All right. Just feel like all right. Yay, Jenna. All right. Okay, fantastic. All right, so we'll get this weird party started. Hey, Joanne, this is fantastic. Okay, it's kind of weird. Okay, it's all good. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. So just let me know if you can't see it. So this is what we're going to talk about today. This excitement that we're about to go upon. Yeah, great, good stuff. Okay. All right. Fantastic. All right. So we're going to talk about digital transformation. So I'm about to play this slide. Just make sure that we can see everybody. So I can't see the chats or anything like that. So I'll stop sharing about a little bit through just to make sure if there's any questions. So again, my name is Nicole Norris. I'm the manager of the Center for Changemaking Social Innovation at Georgian College. My co-conspirator is not here today, but so it's just me. So lucky you guys. Adam Dagenet. So Adam Dagenet is our community animator. And yes, as he says, that is a real title. Yeah, so really excited to sort of go ahead with this today. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, make sure I can see everybody. Sort of awkward. Okay. Fantastic. All right, so we'll go back and we're good. All right. Cool. Hey, so excited. Hey, Emily. All right, good to see you. Okay, cool. So we're going to talk to you about changemaking versus digital transformation today. So first of all, just wanted to really talk about first our sense of place and talk to you about Georgian College acknowledges that all campuses are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Georgian College is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and the respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And so I just wanted to introduce, because I know we're coming in from all over the world here and different places. So this is just a snapshot of the region that we live in. It's wonderfully diverse. It's flourishing. We have beautiful winter and lakes in the summer. We're lucky to be on the Canadian Shield, which is a wonderful place, which has amazing wildlife, bogs, cottage country. We spend a lot of time. We have diverse farmland and hills. We're on the Niagara Escarpment. So when Lake Iroquois of the Great Lakes was there, we sort of bordered along our Niagara Escarpment. Left us with some beautiful vinelands and wonderful wine region in the Niagara Peninsula, if you're familiar with it. We also have wonderful forests as well. Canada is known for its forests as well. The boreal forests, not necessarily in our area, but we are known for that sort of that idea of we've sort of owned the lungs of the North, you may want to say, with sort of our globe. So just a little bit about Georgian College unto itself. So Georgian College is unique. It's a college. And in Canada, colleges and universities have two very interesting distinctions. Colleges can grant degrees, but they're generally diplomas. They're much more applied learning. And they have a lot of cooperative education. What's unique about Georgian is we are located just north of Toronto in Ontario in Canada. We have 7 campuses. So we cover a large geographic footprint, which is really great because it allows us to have some diversity in our regions and our geography. So place is very important. We deal with complexities that are not necessarily the same as an urban campus. We are sort of rural, non-urban, and in some ways a little remote. We have 13 full-time students. We have 3,600 international students. We have 6,200 employers offering co-op or work integrated learning. And why is that important? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today because this digital transformation versus change making sort of centers on change making supporting our cooperative education for our students. So the other thing that's really cool too is because we are a college, we are the first and only Changemaker College to this day. I know there's lots in the hopper that are coming down the pipe, but we were really proud of the fact that we were one of the first colleges to receive this designation back in 2017. So that was wonderful, headed by our amazing team, our change team led by Tracy Mitchell-Ashley and Susie Addison-Tour, who I know are floating around the conference here today. So if you get a chance to meet and talk with them, they're pretty incredible women. The other thing, too, to know about Georgian College and the Center for Change Making and Social Innovation is that the Center for Change Making and Social Innovation is one of 3 innovation centers at Georgian College. So this little spectrum here, it sort of was a way to articulate, sorry, my dog's in the background, so if you hear her snoring and snorting, she's just upset she didn't get to go play yet. The Center for Change Making and Social Innovation, we're one of 3 innovation centers here at Georgian. What you can see here is sort of, if we were to sort of put these across sort of the academic programs, you can see sort of where they sort of line up. And what's interesting about where we sit is that we're not necessarily curricular. We sort of border in this co-curricular, intercurricular zone, into applied learning zone. And so what's really interesting about that as we build programming and different things out, the big thing for us is that students don't necessarily have to come see us. And so when we talk about change making, one of the things that we look at is that, how do we achieve our goals? And if we are not necessarily curricular at this point, maybe a little bit more co-curricular, I mean, that's starting to change. We need to know the goals of the center around change making is everybody needs to know about change making. Everyone sees themselves as change makers. And our goal is to also amplify, increase opportunities to do change making at Georgian, and be proud that we're the one and only Changemaker campus, which shows some of our leadership. So these are some of the goals that my team at the Center for Changemaking and Social Innovation is responsible for, but also for some of our change leads that are distributed across the campus. So as you can see, that's sort of interesting. We've got a 7 campus footprint, which means we have 7 locations spread geographically. We sit sort of a little bit outside of the curricular, so we're a little bit more co-curricular, we're more sort of applied learning. And our job is to go across the system. So these are some of the things that we look at and how we've applied to it. And keep in mind, I haven't even told you about the pandemic piece yet. This is all our pre-pandemic world. So the other thing to know just about this presentation is the character that you see here on your right is named Charlie. And just to let you know that our mascot at Georgian is Growler, the Georgian Grizzlies. And so when changemaking sort of arrived on campus, we created this sort of symbol for changemaking. And so as you saw the goals before, and you saw that we're embedded as one of the innovation centers, we go across these 7 campuses, we really started to need to sort of identify. And what we were starting to find is this vision of a changemaker, one who desires change in the world, and by gathering knowledge and resources makes that change happen. What we started to do is people really resonated with this, but we started to want to sort of form a little bit, not an identity, but sort of a myth or a mythos or an ethos around this. And so we kind of started to come up with this idea of Charlie was Growler's cousin who had gone off into the world. And when Georgian had received their designation, came back to realize that social purpose was a priority, and it had always been a priority at Georgian, but now that it was really coming to the forefront, and Charlie had come back to show what they had learned in their travels and sort of reunited with Growler. So that's our unofficial story. I don't know if marketing is okay with that, but that's our story. And when Charlie came back from their adventures, they brought back with them these sort of 10 pathways. And so as you can see here, we call these the Changemaker Pathways. And what Charlie was talking about and what we were saying at Georgian was that it didn't matter what program you were from, it didn't matter what you were studying. It was just this idea that whether you were in graphic design, whether you were in engineering, whether you were in nursing, whether you were in hairdressing, that you could apply your skills and your vision of how you wanted the world to be changed through different pathways. And so you could be an activist engineer, or you could be a volunteer nurse. There's a lot of ways that change can happen depending on how confident you feel, how personally, the tools that you have available to you. And it was a way that you could start to sort of tag along your journey through Georgian, the soft skills and the Changemaker competencies that would build up the capacity in this area. So I'm just going to stop sharing here for a second. I just want to check the chat and make sure that nobody's here. Okay, no chat. All right, we'll go back. Okay, so that was sort of jarring, Nicole. We'll go here. Okay. So back to our pathway. So how do we start to work with pathways with our students? Well, one of the things that we started to do is, as students were starting to look at their projects right across the system, was that they could tag into these pathways. And as you can see here, these were two students. They were social service worker students. They actually looked at developing a platform where people could share food. And that food could be delivered. So they had people who had food, and then they had people who needed food. And then that they said, well, we could, bring a bunch of volunteers together if we had a sort of a connector platform. And so they saw themselves as they saw themselves in sort of the volunteer pathway and the social innovator pathway. So they were social innovating around volunteerism. And so that was sort of some of the ways that we started to be able to talk about and sort of tag social change making across the system. So it wasn't just sort of, sitting in sort of one discipline. It was sort of, discipline agnostic. The next thing we did is we started to say, well, hey, could we actually get you to see yourself? So everyone a change maker. And so we started to look at these pathways. And so pre-pandemic, what we were starting to do is we started to hire character artists to come in. And this is our outgoing student union president at our main campus, Dhruv, and he sees himself as an activist. So he's got this sort of really cool character. What we were able to do, sort of interestingly enough, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a second, as we started to hit into a world that became exceptionally virtual, is we then changed it and we created an avatar generator. So this is one of the first places that we started to go with our students and started to digitize the environment that we were in. And so we were starting to head this way. And so we have this really cool, you can go to charliechangemaker.com. If you've seen a couple of people at the Ashoka conference, they have these little avatars. What's really cool is, so you can get the Charlie helmet and goggles. You can get the little lightning bolt helmet. You can sort of, you can actually, on the shirt, you can actually put the little symbol for your Changemaker pathway. And what's great about that is we now have an arrangement with our bookstore where you can actually go and you can actually buy customized swag. It's drop shipped to your door. It's made one-off. So it's really cool. So you can get mugs and shirts and masks and all that kind of stuff and backpacks. Now is that you can walk around and say that you are a change maker and start to identify. And so that was really cool. And we were ticking along, and some of the things we were always facing, and I thought I'd drop these in here. So these are some of the things that we were always facing at Georgian, is this idea of what is change making. As we were starting to grow and expand to change making, and we were starting to do these things, we would start to talk to other departments, and they would be like, what is change making? It takes a long time to onboard, and it takes a lot of explanation. And we're like, yeah, that's true. So we'll try all these different angles. We tried self-locating. So we did these amazing storyboards to have these conversations, keeping in mind this is all pre-digital world. And so we start to have a lot of discussions. So we start to have a lot of these discussions. The other thing too, another part of our challenges were this hub and spoke versus going across the system. So we recognize that, in social innovation and change, that sort of the hierarchies and the location of the hub and spoke model coming out of the center wasn't necessarily aligned to how we were working. And so we had to move to some more of a distributed system. And in a lot of ways, as we were starting to look at what our business model and what our model of the center was, is, we were really facing in this tension of the hub and spoke versus the distributed system. And the distributed system is much more like the internet, where, or when you're looking at it, it's not sort of a central agency, it's controlled, it's distributed across. And so what we were really trying to figure out how to do that was, how do we create a distributed model across these 7 campuses, across all these programs? So then this thing happened. And this thing happened last year. And we were just talking about this today. It's an anniversary that, the lockdown happened. And so all these things that we were looking at and all these things that I was showing you about, we were trying our challenges and all these kind of things actually worked out pretty well for us, because what we sort of said is, all these things that we're trying to do could be replicated and duplicated in a digital world. And if we could actually create a model that we could create in the digital world, then it would be easy to probably re-engineer it and put it back into our analog world when we go back to a hybrid model. And these were some of the things that we were having conversations about. So as we know, each institution handled it differently. We saw rapid change. I mean, obviously that was a topic of conversation last year. But one of the cool things is, so when this thing happened, so this is Bricksburg from the Lego 2 movie. And I always remember sort of as we sort of hit lockdown, it was sort of, I remember, Wild Style, or Lucy looking out over Bricksburg right after it had been destroyed and thinking, oh my God, like, what do we do in this sort of world? And that was sort of the image that I had when we first started with our team. But what it allowed us to do is, and I always looked at Bricksburg and how it had been kind of taken over in the Lego movie. There was bricks everywhere. And so what was great about it was, so all these things that we've been talking about and all these things that we were trying to build and, trying to force into the system, sort of an analog system, but actually would work better maybe in a digital, is that we were able now to sort of look at that and build that. And so one of the great things about it is we had all these Lego bricks on the ground. And so right away, we sat down and we said, okay, here's what we need to do. So step one, we took a look at how do we create value in the system? So how does change making create value and how does our center do it? And these are some of the sort of the key things that we did. So we were highly participatory. We were highly creative and fun. We were highly collaborative. We dealt with soft skills, which is what employers are looking for, we know, and sort of the 21st century skills. We were a bit of a black box, so nobody knew really sort of how we worked, which was kind of cool. So we weren't sort of going against something like a status quo. So we weren't sort of saying like we used to do it this way, because we were sort of in the middle of figuring that out. And the other thing too is we had built an opted in and engaged database of 2,000 students. So we thought we were pretty good. So these were sort of our building blocks. The next thing we tried to figure out is now we're in this fully virtual world. We had to look across and what are the new capabilities that we needed in sort of this digital world. So with our building blocks, we said, okay, so what are the capabilities now we need to create digital value co-creation, digital channels, uncommon partnerships, so redefining partnerships. What was our relationship capital that we had to build? What were the capabilities we needed around activities now that we had to do in a digital space? What were some of the resources we needed? And how are we going to measure this? And so that was sort of where we started. The next thing we did is we recognized that we were actually essentially a service delivery model that was distributed across the network. And so we pulled we did some research on user experience design, service delivery design. And so we selected this Dubberly and Evanson framework, which is fairly quite prevalent in service delivery process. And we started to plan around sort of this iterative and generative break build strategy around our programming. So we went from sort of having these concrete, very tactical workshops, deliveries, we were using tools, we were using cards, we were using all this stuff, we were, had people in, it was very, everything was touchy-feely and like you're doing this. And we had to completely flip to that and start to look at it as more as how do we, deliver the same service but in a different process. And so what we did is we started in March and April right away. We did the observation and reflect, and we explored a lot. Then we started to build some stuff. We selected platforms and tools that we thought. So we did a complete rebuild. We sort of started to refine and make things. Then we started to socialize things. So then we started to go out and do those partnership collaborations. And then we started to implement. And so what we're going to sort of look at was, and then as we started to implement, what were some of the things that we needed to look at? So the next thing we did was we thought, okay, so in a digital reality with change making, we have an opportunity to create hyper experiences. And when we started to say, well, what kind of experiences do you mean by that? We started to look at different frameworks, right? So this ability to change behavior, to be exceptional, to recognize that, capabilities have to be built on both our students, faculty, and our partner side. We're entering new technology, new platforms, they're learning, they're overloaded. So one of the things we looked at was, how do video games get through complex tasks, right? So when we talked about onboarding, some of our challenges where people are like, what's change making? It's really complex. Or we're like, well, what about a complex video game? How does that work? And how does that sort of thing? So we started to really look at, okay, now, so how might change making be a game, right? And how might we move through that distributed network in a gamified manner? And so you can see here, we sort of moved from looking at, what do we want to set up? How do we move to gamification? And then what is some of the psychology around gamification and types of players? And how do we start to build that? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and see if there's any questions in the chat right now before we go on to the next one. So are there any questions at this point that anybody has in the chat? Everybody's good? Cool, I'll go back. Sorry, guys, this is it's good. So we'll go back to that. Very cool. All right. So no questions, feel free to ask in chat. So this is sort of where we ended up. So this is sort of an ongoing process. And so how did we actually materialize this process? Well, we developed something called Changemaker and Residency Week. And so what this was, and as you can see here, we did our first one back in the fall. And the goal is to take everything we could possibly learn about the digital environment and developing digital service delivery of change making into 1 week. So before, when we were in a non-digital model, we would go around to classrooms and we would go see people. And we realized the capacity of our team could not deliver on that in scale. But what we realized is if we flip that model and deliver an ultimate experience and a service in 1 week, could we bring people to us? And could we learn and develop our capacity for the digital world together? So highly interactive, could we replicate and duplicate everything we were known for? And could we reach out and partner? So we designed this thing called Changemaker and Residency Week. It was the animation of 21st century future skills. It had 54 interactive virtual sessions. And even that was interesting how we did that. It had over 35 remote participant seats in total. So that's how many seats we had. And the cool thing about it is we had 523 participants attending an average of 5 workshops each. And those participants actually came from our co-op. So when you remember I talked about our uncommon partnerships, was this idea that we could start to partner. And so our biggest partner in this collaboration was actually Georgian's Cooperative Education and Career Success. And they recognized that they actually had probably 1,000 students that could not get work placement for their term because of the COVID situation. We had gone and we had pitched an idea to them where they played a game. And when they came to us and said, we have 1,000 students, can you help us? We said, sure. And so this was an opportunity to test this. As we started to go out and pitch this idea, we went to Ashoka, we went to the Simcoe County District School Board, we went to our student association and said, we're going to do this crazy thing. We have co-op on board. This is what we want to test. This is what we want to learn. Do you want to join us? And so it was really great in the system. The collaboration in the system came together and they said, sure. And everybody sort of pitched in an idea. They saw what we were doing with sort of how we wanted to present our workshops and do that. And it was really cool. So just moving forward. So how did Changemaker and Residency work and what did we do here? Well, what we said is we played it like a choose your own adventure. So it wasn't a conference. It wasn't like, we didn't want it to be a conference. What we really wanted to be was a bunch of workshops sort of bundled together under this sort of loose week. And the goal was for you to figure out how you wanted to play it. So there was 2 ways you could do it. We had real time. So we had workshops that were live and we would do like highly interactive workshops. Then what we did is but later we call those the async workshops. So we would record the sessions and we would put like all the platforms and the tools that we use and you could follow along. You could use those Changemaker pathways. So if you were interested in exploring sort of a social innovator or a researcher pathway, we had a lot of sessions aligned to that. So you could actually chart it through your pathway. The other way is you could play this game called Grizzly Go. And so Grizzly Go was this idea that you could, what you would do is every time you attended a session, you got innovation capital points. And so as you played the point, and we were able to build this infrastructure, and then they would deploy a patch. And this patch essentially could then be shared on LinkedIn, and you can see one of our participants had shared it. We gave out 192 of these achievements. That means that people who opted in to play Grizzly Go generally accrued 15 innovation capital points, which means that they, at the very minimum, they played at the very minimum, they went to 5 workshops. At the maximum, they could go to as many as they wanted. And so what we started to find is that people were opting in to play Grizzly Go because they could get 5 workshops, they could get it done, but they were starting to actually do more. And we saw that in some of the data that we pulled in. We hobbled it together. So we had a big debate about what kind of platforms we should use. And, everybody's like, oh, we should get an app. We should run it through a conference app. We should do that. And I wasn't totally convinced. And I'm sure my team was sort of shaking their head at me when we were doing this. But what I wanted to figure out was how we stacked technology and how we created a journey through the different types of technology. And what were some of the workflows that we would use without being beholden to an actual vision about how an event system would go. Because what we were doing is we weren't necessarily doing a conference, we were doing a learning engagement. And so the learning engagement was to build capacity of our students to understand technology and hop and leverage platforms. So they would learn interoperability, they would learn ambidexterity in different platforms. And so as you can see here, what we started to do is, instead of saying like, okay, we're going to just pick it off the shelf, what if we hobbled together our analytics, high use versus low use, and how do we do that? So we tried everything from augmented reality to our interactive mural workshops. And for those of you who might be familiar with mural or Miro, these are basically whiteboards. You know, Google Jamboard's a way to do it, but we did mural because we really like the facilitation tools. Builder, which is a movement building framework. A lot of political institutions, Greenpeace, those kind of things use it. So the other thing that we were looking at when we looked at analytics is, how do we create movement? Or how do we create a movement? How do we create those student leaders, and how can we measure them? We use Zapier for workflow integration. We use Eventbrite for registration. We obviously use Zoom, Teams, WebEx, whoever decided what they wanted at the time. And we use Flipgrid for some reflection. So this was sort of our first incarnation, how we hobbled it all together. So that was a really big learning for us. And I think the team really, really liked this as much as they didn't, but it really gave us an opportunity to also have ownership on how the journey happened in the digital space. So basically what we ended up with, so the outcome was our goal was building future-ready digitally literate grads, which was what it was about. It was also building future-ready and digitally literate change makers. So these are some of the details that we got out from our survey. This was sort of when we did our survey. But we saw some pretty phenomenal numbers that started to come out with it, with how we were constructing the technology and sort of the communication and the engagement piece. And what we saw was that it actually aligned. So we were able to translate some of these soft skills into sort of a career context and how it could be applied. And the students were starting to make the links. And they were also walking away with this idea that by the end of the week, because they'd taken so many workshops and we had, sort of replicated and duplicated the same process over and over of the engagement within the platforms, within Mural, within some of these sort of things, that they were starting to build capacity and capability. So the other thing that we also found too, as we were starting to construct and stack these platforms and stack the experience, was we allowed student, staff, community partners, and faculty to all join in. So we didn't sort of draw the line at anybody. It wasn't just students. I've now been talking a lot about students, but our stakeholders are vast in terms of the ecosystem of changemaking. And what we started to find is that we were creating affinity through inspiration. And so what was happening was, for partners, they were really inspired by the way that we were hobbling together technology that they could use, that was accessible to them. So if we had gone out and bought a big conference software and paid thousands of dollars, that's not necessarily accessible to our community partners and our smaller employers and stuff that support us. Remember, we have 6,200 employers that support. And our staff and admin were also recognizing that, because we had such huge collaboration and partnerships, we were telling stories about how changemaking can solve your challenges and how we can turn ourselves inward and be our own innovators as opposed to being external, and how, approaches that we were doing in changemaking could actually solve internal problems and pull that together. The students, they were connecting. So they spent a week, you think you got 525 just to get a conference. But what was starting to happen was, the same students were showing up in the same workshops. And the way that we had designed the workshops is there was these really cool introductions that we were doing. And so students were really starting to recognize each other, and they were going to the breakout rooms together. So it was really cool. And the other thing too was the faculty. Our faculty, we all know, they really, I really felt for our faculty as we had to flip and change, and the demands that were placed on them to change. And it was sort of just this idea of how to use changemaking to develop community service and learning-based projects, starting to give them toolkits, the permission to go out and kind of let us explore some of that frontier and come back and say, these are the ways that you could use it and take what you want from this and that sort of thing. So that was sort of the inspiration. And so that was kind of cool what we did. The other thing too, just to let you know, this is the breakdown of sessions that we did. So we tried to make sure that we had a lot of sessions so that people could actually really start to explore Changemaker Pathways. That was really great for their feedback. So they started to really understand that. The other thing we did too is we talked about the UN sustainability goals, and I sort of glossed over that in the beginning, but we really wanted to anchor it in something. And so these were sort of the top goals that we were able to speak to with some of our workshops and some of our conversations that we had. So it was nice to sort of hone in and focus on some of those. And there was multiple sessions that sort of crossed over on those. That was kind of cool. 17 being sort of the institutional piece where we on the partnership for the goals. The other thing too is that we realized that the work we were doing, so sort of is a little fuzzy here, this was a screenshot from one of the actual murals with some of the feedback, is that Changemaker and Residency Week, we actually proved that we could teach soft skills digitally. And so the collaboration and the design of the workshops, how we did it, we proved that we could actually, the sentiment value was they actually felt like they were achieving the Ashoka competencies. Now, obviously you have to measure that a little bit, but at least students were starting to walk away, or attendees were starting to walk away with feeling like they had actually, they had experienced these skills. So again, sort of that inspiration. The other thing too, recognize with the partnership outcomes, we left away and we walked away and we gave our partners things. So we were building workshops, we were co-creating workshops together, we were co-creating engagements together. And we were able to walk away and leave our partners with their own workshops. So, while we were doing it, but we were also giving back to our partners and saying, okay, we built some, interactive murals, we built some interactive workshops, now they're yours. And because we asked our partners to co-facilitate with us or co-partner or co-pilot with us, allowed our team to sort of train the trainer, we did do this. And after we were done, it was really cool because Co-op and Co-op Services actually did some of the team building workshops. So they took the comeback resilience, job resiliency, it was with the empathy toy, and it was really kind of cool. They actually took that back and did it as a team building exercise. So it was really sort of nice to see that people, it was sort of everybody was involved in co-creating together. And then when it sort of left, we went away and people took pieces of it. The other cool thing about it too was we were always so interesting thing at Georgian, Changemaking comes out of our human services and our community development campus, our community services campus. It doesn't come out of the business school. So at Georgian, we were always getting challenged with, change makings to, it's not for business and tech. Well, I'll tell you something. Our largest pie here was computer programming. These were the largest groups that were represented. And when you can look back and see the data, we were able to sort of prove that we could say that change making is relevant no matter where you are, what program you're in. And as you can see here, we have a lot more of sort of the hard skill programs and the importance of those soft skills, and that we were able to sort of resonate with our key programming. The other thing too, we started to look at devices, and I know this isn't a great graph, but it's sort of readability wise. So the other thing we wanted to look at too is we were finding a lot of students were dialing in from their phone. We know connectivity is always an issue, but we were also sort of interested around the phone and the computer. So this was really fascinating. We did a little bit deeper dive into that. So we were really interested in around the number of people that were using their phones for these workshops. So that's something that we're sort of starting to look at and dig a little deeper into. The other thing too is we noticed, like we said before with the gamification piece, the gamification piece was a great way to do it. But what we were starting to find is students that were going for their co-op recovery, they only needed to basically complete 5 workshops. But what we were starting to find is that people were enrolling in more. And we started to hear from people that once they started to understand what we were doing and the engagement that we were doing, this was sort of what it was. The other key themes that we learned as we went through this was, these are from the respondents, these are from the participants who took our survey, these participation, is that there are big learnings were around the building of connection, job search strategies, teamwork. So a lot of these building and learning these new skills and discovering oneself. So a lot of work we also did was how do you collaborate in this digital space? Because the way that we designed things were very collaborative, breakout rooms. You couldn't just sort of sit there. You really had to be engaged. So some great learnings there. And then what did we learn beyond the data? Well, we took a hard look at it afterwards because we know there was lots of room for improvement around accessibility, inclusion of topics and things like that around change making. Just basically some mechanical stuff. We were building this while we fly. So, there was a lot of, because we hobbled together the tech. So we do have a lot of sort of infrastructure improvements. The facilitator and team brief notes, we were pretty hard on ourselves. We were talking, communication of value proposition, tracking of participation. So a lot of data and analytics, delivery of that service delivery model. So really sort of asking ourselves to sort of say, are we delivering the best service we can? Are we delivering the best experience? And moving forward with that. The next thing that we had moving forward is, we started to say, okay, well, if we're going to do this again, because obviously we are next week, what are some of the other things that we need to measure from a human-computer interaction perspective? Because we are digital. And how does that translate? So these are sort of the three buckets we're using to move forward with: the relevancy to the student, its effectiveness and efficiency and satisfaction, and usability and improvement. So these are all taken from the ISO standards of usability reports. As well, it's used in human-centered design for sort of product development and digital platforms. So these are some of the things that we're starting to look at. And if you're interested and you want to experience what I just talked about, you can come join us next week. And we are starting this again next week. We have 5 days. We have 60 sessions this time. We have some new workshops, same format, same process. We're going to run it again, see how we're doing it as a rapid prototype. And yeah, and just a quick thank you to our contributors that worked on this. As you can see, Ashoka Canada was a big part of that. You can see we use our research and innovation department, institutional research, and of course the center as part of the evaluation to continue the collaboration. So that's all I have for you today. Just wondering if there's any questions at this point of the thing. Yes, I can share the presentation. I have not shared it because I didn't do my accessibility on it, so I just held it back. So I will do that, and I will make sure the presentation is shared for everybody. Amazing. Okay, so we said you can only see the chat box. Sorry. Does anybody else have that problem? Did I just go through a presentation and nobody saw it? Oh, okay. So I got a question here. Great presentation. I see that the participants suggested for more informal connection to be improved. What action did you take, or what the platforms did you use in particular? I think this is an important part for community building engagement. I would love some suggestions. Kind regards. Okay. So that's a really great question. And we are still struggling with that. So I'll tell you something that we did find in some of this is from the engagement standpoint, what we started to do was, yes. Okay, so let me answer the first question. Okay, so lots of questions here. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first one. So let's talk about intimate community engagement. So one of the things that we did was we started to look at students who were highly engaged and interested in change making. And so we actually created a separate, sort of a separate program for them to sort of go into. And what we tried to do is we tried to look at how students build connection online using other social platforms. And so we found this platform called Mighty Networks. And Mighty Networks is sort of a Reddit / Facebook groups platform. And what we started to do is people that really wanted those connections, we started to funnel them into this platform. I know it's another platform, but we started to funnel this into this platform, and we've been using it right now. And we're starting to find the students are quite engaged in there, because what it does is it creates intimate connections, and it allows the students, just like in Reddit, to go into sort of subsections of the group, but it's completely closed, right? So it's not, it's completely closed. Sorry, that was the dog. It's completely closed. So that is what we've been using. So we have, just to answer your question, we haven't fully solved it yet, but what we're starting to find is that they're liking to be in sort of intimate, closed, personal conversations that they can hop around to. So kind of like, I guess, like that HubSpot or the Hub thing that we're doing. But the platform we've been trying is called Mighty Networks. Does that answer that question? Let me just get to, oops, sorry. I lost my cursor. Hold on, just give me a second here. Sorry. Okay, let me get back here. Now I've got control. Now I've got control, master control. Okay, so that was Pelin. And then Susie, I got to answer this question because Susie's my director. How's this going to translate when we're back on campus? That's a great question, Susie. So one of the conversations that we're talking about right now is how do we do that? And so I still think that we can do it. And what we were thinking about, what we've been talking about now is having sort of taking spaces within the campus. So at Georgian, we have sort of two spaces, or these two labs that we have that we don't run our programming in the same way. And one of the things that we were thinking about doing was allowing students to actually go to these small labs and have these small breakout areas, but also still be connected, because we're able to put them in sort of a whiteboard space, and we can widget that in with the technology. We can still facilitate the way we're doing, but we can offer for them to go to sort of other areas or other locations. So kind of like we have these little micro on-campus spaces where they can actually collaborate, and we can put a facilitator or a lead or a co-facilitator in there, but then they actually can still see the facilitation and do the facilitation, but they can do it in person. So still working on that idea, but I think there's a hybrid opportunity where if students want to go online, they can still collaborate. But if they want to come in a group, they can do that too. So to be determined. Could this framework apply for shorter learning environments such as boot camps? Absolutely. So the framework we stole was from design sprints. And so how we built our workshops is that they're actually a full arc. And so what we can do with it is the individual workshops that we did on Mural were built like that. So if you wanted to just do a small sprint, what you can do is you can set up the Mural, you can run the facilitation, and then you can give either rooms, you can give team rooms off, and they can have the templates we talked about on the workshops, or they can have their own Mural room. So we do sessions like that are 2 hours, or we can do it as a half a day. So it was kind of cool the way that we put the framework together is it can expand and contract based upon the narrative that we built the workshops with. And we're just in the middle right now of sort of debunking what that narrative was, and saying like, here was our design system, you know, by how we did our workshops, right? So here's all the sections in our facilitation, and then here's how we relate to those murals and activities. And then how can we expand and compress that? So we've been looking at some of that as well too. Okay. Is there a follow-up with the participants on the first Changemaker and Residency week? So the follow-up we did was, an evaluation. So once we had everybody sort of through and they were done, we offered them 15 innovation capital points to add to their badge if they completed the survey. So they did do that. Now the follow-up actually came for the students. So I'm just speaking to the student-wise. The students followed up with their co-op advisors because they were doing it as part of a co-op recovery strategy. The follow-up was done with a reflection with the co-op, with their co-op team. So what happened was they went through, they had to answer some questions. Those were handed in as reflections. And then the co-op consultant followed up with them and sort of did that. For community partners and other students, so community partners in general, we do have a team member on our team, and their job is to actually follow up with the partners. And we actually had sessions just for faculty and just for partners. So we sort of had sort of private sessions. And so for the faculty, they would follow up in a community of practice. So all of the faculty were coming, they were coming to take a look at what changemaking was, explore it, and then they could opt in to be part of a community practice moving forward. And so, yeah, so they would come, they would learn about it. This is really cool, sign up for the community practice, and then they would continue with that. Our community partners, same sort of thing. We would connect them to potentials of how to work with students at Georgian, how to employ students at Georgian, what are the pathways in, and then our co-action coordinator would follow up with them on a one-to-one basis and start to look where there's projects could land, or we would pass them off to the co-op or the community service learning faculty so that they could find pathways. So in terms of that follow-up piece, that was how that's how we looked at. We sort of looked at them individually by the stakeholders. How is the inclusion piece for various learning capabilities different? Yeah, that's a good question, Joanne. So that is one we are still working on. So there's a couple things. One, because it was fully remote, we did find that, you know, people who do have issues with mobility and different things like that, they could participate, no problem. It sort of was the normalizer. Some of the other things, though, that we have to look at, and we do have to do a better job at this is where we were looking at the usability and sort of the inclusion design was language. We also have to look at the interface. So some of those kind of things. So we do have a lot of work to do on that aspect. And to me, that's sort of an interesting and a fascinating piece on this. We have asked in our new evaluation that we're doing next week, we've actually sort of dug a little bit deeper into that for our participants, and we're asking them more inclusivity and usability questions, like, and to sort of gauge some of that. So it is something ongoing. We're sort of learning as we do. The big piece is the technology, accessibility around Wi-Fi, the platform. Some of them can be bandwidth hogs because we are sort of in rural and interesting environments. Internet's not always the best. Yeah, so I can't really answer that other than to say that we have identified areas where we need to improve, and we can improve. It's just we're gonna need to prototype it a little bit more. So I hope that answers that question. What resource did you use to adapt the design sprints? So I guess that is relating to when we're talking about how we built some of the workshops, like the flow. I'm not sure how to answer that one. So I can answer it from this perspective, if you like, Akara. As so I'm a big framework nut. So I'm always like, there's a framework for that, and we'll find it. So the framework we did use to adapt sort of the sprinting piece was the Deberly and Everson model, where we were looking at sort of that iterative process, and within that iterative process, what do we define as how do we adapt that? So are we adapting the interface to move them through the sprint faster, or are we adapting the journey through the platforms differently? So I don't know if that answers that question 100%, but just looking at various different types of design and innovation frameworks, depending on what we felt was either sort of a UX, interaction piece, or if it was sort of an experience piece. So, okay. Is there any other questions? I feel really, I hope I answered everybody's question okay. If you have any other questions, I'll put my, that's my email address if anybody wants to talk more about it. Yeah, so that was sort of where we had looked. So we are starting. So I can give you some more information. So next week, we're going to be rerunning this again, Changemaker and Residency Week Winter. Some of the things that we have looked at improving upon. So one of the areas that we really struggled with was who decided what we were offering students in terms of topics and subject matter. So one of the things that we did do is we reached out to our Indigenous Center because we felt that it was all fine and well for the voices that we had, but we really sort of wanted to focus on some different voices. And so we are going to have a large Indigenous and activist conversation happening next week. Working with the presentation. I'll have to upload it. I haven't done the accessibility piece on the presentation yet, so that's why I haven't uploaded it, but I can definitely do that for you. So that was the other thing that we wanted to do, was looking at the voices that were in. And so we really tried this time around to really look at our Changemaker Pathways and what would be some of the voices that could speak to these pathways that are not like me, right? Like, could we bring in a diverse cultural perspective? And so we have brought in our Indigenous Center, and they were amazing. They brought in, so we're opening with a decolonization cafe. So we're looking at the land acknowledgement and how do we take a land acknowledgement and really put ourselves in a sense of place and write a meaningful land acknowledgement. We're also doing a closing ceremony where we are showing how art and song can be part of activism and Indigenous resurgence. So we really started to stretch ourselves to really sort of push conversation. The other thing that we did too in this workshop is we really tried to look at how dialogue and conversation and community happens, and that we recognize that system change starts, first when you think about the iceberg, it starts first with the mindset. And so can we have deeper conversations about some of the issues that are sort of prevalent today? And so part of what the cornerstones that we're trying to do is, as we build out Changemaker and Residency, we can see how are we using this to achieve our goals, to achieve the system change agenda, to get students onboarded into this. How do we teach them how to have conversations and tough conversations in safe spaces? And so that, I think, is the next sort of thing that we're going to go down, is we're going to explore how this technology is supporting. And I think it goes back to the question that was asked around too, like, you know, those intimate conversations. And so how do we take them from a compelling conversation in sort of a digital environment and put them somewhere where they can continue to have these or create action? So that, I think, was the next sort of exploration and some of the things that we've been looking at. So Carrie, you got another question here. Can you talk more about the Changemaker pathways and the different pathways you identified? Absolutely. So long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, when people were starting to ask us about, well, what is change making? And the best answer we could give is like, it's a spectrum, right? And, you know, change making doesn't have to be this bold act that changes the world. It could just be a simple act. And so by bringing in the 10 pathways, and there was no rhyme nor reason as to how we found the 10 pathways. What we sort of did is we sort of had a dialogue with some faculty and some sort of change leaders. And we said, you know, when you think about change making, what are all the different ways that change making can happen? You know, and it could start first with sort of an empathetic approach or an empathetic mindset. So you could be an empathizer in a community. And, you know, that, you know, whatever that means, like you just empathize with people. So you could be an engineer, or you could be an ECE, an early childhood educator. It doesn't matter. It's just the idea that you can empathize, all the way up to a policymaker. And so this idea that how does a policymaker shift and change and create change, right? Well, they have their hand on the pulse of massive community dialogue and resources. So, you know, if they're sort of taking sort of this policymaking pathway, how are they looking at change making and human centeredness in a policy? So we have 10 pathways, and there are various degrees of impact. There are various degrees of agency within them. No one is higher than the other. They're just sort of 10 ways that a student can sort of look at it and say, you know, that resonates with me. I want to go explore it. How we've used them programmatically at the center is we're starting to use them to identify and measure the population of the center. So the platform Nation Builder that we are using allows us to categorize those students who have selected the different pathways. It allows us to speak to them so we can design programming. So if we know we have an overabundance of, say, people interested in social entrepreneurship, then we can speak to them and we can build programming specifically for them. And then we can measure sort of their engagement as they go along in that programming. The other thing we can do too is it sort of gives us an idea in each faculty, you know, what pathways are resonating in each sort of discipline, right? Like, are we finding predominantly social service workers are just, they think it's just an empathizer pathway? So is there a way that we can talk to them about being an empathizer, but could we move you along the spectrum and say, you could be an activist too, or you could be a social entrepreneur because you understand that. And so the pathways are really a spectrum for us to help students self-locate themselves in the conversation of change making, to realize it's not an either or, like they don't have to give up what they're doing. It's something that they can tack on to. And it gives them the vocabulary to design a social purpose pathway. And that was sort of the vision for that. Because when I think back, when I went to school, you know, I was always told, you know, you're in design, you're going to go work for a corporation, that's what you're going to do. But if I had had the vocabulary, or I had sort of the vision that I could explore other pathways, I don't know if I would have landed there. I would have probably been more like the activist route. And that was sort of what we were trying to do from a vocational standpoint, was to do that. So I don't know if that explains that. But yeah, the pathways, we're really exploring those as well too, about how that they can be used. Are there any other comments or questions on anything? Do you guys want to see do you want to see one of our workshops? Do you want to see one of the murals? We have about 20 minutes left. Yeah, I do have a brilliant, I can do that. Let me, you know what I can do is, I do have a spectrum. Here, let me do this. Give me 1 second here. Let me post some links in the chats for you. So I'll take you here. Oops. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to grab a link for you. Nope, that's not the link I want. This is the link I want. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat. This is on our website, our Georgian website. So if you go here, you'll be able to access the okay, so this is the Georgian website. So you'll be able to access the Changemaker Pathways and stuff. So there's some blocks around the, here, I can probably, on the, you'll see a quick reference guide. So if you go to that link on the right side of the page, there's some blue bars. That'll give you kind of some of the things we were talking about. So it'll give you the download for the Changemaker Pathways. It'll give you kind of the quick start guide as how to get started with changemaking at Georgian from the digital context and that stuff. Okay, so let's get you in, and then we'll show you a mural. And you know what we could do? Once we get into the mural, we can like do a phone call in the mural, and then we can talk to each other. Why didn't I think about this earlier, Nicole? As opposed to me feeling like I'm just talking to myself, all alone here. Let me pull the mural up. Okay, let me just give me 1 second here. I'll just do this really, really quickly. Let me find one that, see one really quickly here. What's a good one here? Okay, I'll do this one here. This was actually a mix and mingle. So let me share this. Okay. So I'm going to post this chat in here. If you guys want to join me in this chat, you want to join me in mural? Oh, no, that's not, I didn't. And we'll talk to each other in mural. So let me copy this link. Okay. Okay. All right. So come on over to mural.